Hello, welcome to the virtual enrichment series. In this session, we're discussing passive enrichment with a focus on audio and visual enrichment for dogs. Hello, I'm Jenn Friedline, certified dog behavior consultant, a certified professional dog trainer, and a certified family dog mediator. I'm the founder of Jenn's Dogs, located in Cornelius, Oregon, and we specialize in behavior support and enrichment for dogs with big emotions. I advocate for force-free, relationship-based training by helping families build calm, connected relationships with their dogs through thoughtful enrichment and behavior support. Let's start by talking about what enrichment actually is. Enrichment means meeting a dog's species-typical, breed-typical, and self-typical needs in a healthy, safe, and appropriate way. The goal of enrichment is to structure the dog's environment and routine so they can safely engage in natural and instinctual behaviors. A large part of enrichment is understanding that dogs are designed to do things. They were designed to observe, explore, problem solve, scavenge, socialize, move, and engage with the environment around them. At the same time, many natural dog behaviors do not always fit neatly into modern living and human environments. Because of that, dogs often have fewer opportunities to naturally meet those needs on their own. When dogs constantly lack safe and appropriate outlets for natural behaviors, frustration, stress, and behavioral challenges can begin to develop over time. Enrichment helps provide structured opportunities for dogs to safely and appropriately meet those needs within the environments they live in. I am a certified family dog mediator, and this is a program rooted in ethology. With the Family Dog Mediation program, we look at the whole dog. We use the model that dogs stand on four legs. Those four legs are learning, environment, genetics, and self. This helps us understand behavior more fully by looking at how dogs experience and respond to the world. The most important thing to remember about the legs model is that two of those legs can be influenced directly, which are learning and environment. We can teach our dogs things, and we can adjust the environment. We cannot do anything about their genetics, those are already set. And we do not want to change who they are as an individual, which is their self. The balance matters because just like a table that only has three legs will topple over, we want our dogs to be supported on all four legs as well. At Jenn's Dogs, we split enrichment into 6 core categories in order to build a full and complete, balanced plan to meet all of your dog's needs. The core categories that we have are social, physical, calming, foraging and scavenging, problem solving, and predation sequence. All predatory animals have a predation sequence, and dogs are no different. Even domesticated dogs still are able to fully tap into the full predation sequence, even though to do their standard job that they were bred for, parts of the predation sequence may be heightened or suppressed in order to account for them to do their job. The full predation sequence is the orient, eye lock, stalking, chasing, the grab bite, the kill bite, which is sometimes referred to as the shake bite, dissect, and consume. All predatory passive enrichment includes visual observation, where dogs are watching the environment around them, checking movement, orienting towards sounds, observing distance, patterns, and environmental changes. Especially for visually oriented breeds, observation is an important part of emotional regulation and decision making. Passive enrichment also includes auditory observation, or dogs listening to the environment around them. Sound gives dogs information about things that may not yet be within view or may be happening further away in the environment. Dogs can hear lower volumes, different frequencies, and sounds at greater distances than we can, making auditory processing an important part of how they gather information. Passive enrichment supports long-term emotional processing by giving dogs opportunities to pause, process, and make sense of the world around them. By allowing dogs these opportunities, they are better able to decompress, determine whether something needs attention, dismiss what is not important, remain in thoughtful behavior, and supports their nervous system recovery throughout the day. Passive observation and passive enrichment matters because allowing dogs opportunities to observe the world around them helps them learn how the environment works. As dogs gather information through watching, listening, and environmental processing, things become more familiar and predictable, which can help support feelings of safety and confidence. Pausing to look, listen, scan, and orient is a normal part of information gathering and is not necessarily disobedience or distraction. By allowing dogs time to process their environment through both visual and auditory observation, they are often better able to reduce uncertainty and move through the environment more thoughtfully and safely. Passive enrichment also helps dogs process change. Just because something is new or different or moving or making noise does not automatically mean the dog needs to react to it. Through observation, dogs can learn to dismiss environmental changes and understand that the world around them is fluid and constantly changing. It's important to remember that observation is a functional behavior. Many dogs were selectively bred to notice movement, monitor environmental changes, and gather information in order to make decisions about what to do next. Watching and listening are not meaningless behaviors. They are deeply connected to breed tendencies, survival behaviors, and the early portions of the predation sequence. Understanding this helps guardians better support the dog in front of them rather than constantly pushing dogs to ignore the environment and continue moving forward. Observation and passive. When passive enrichment needs are not being met, dogs may begin trying to meet those needs on their own, and that can sometimes show up in ways that are frustrating or difficult to live with. One of the biggest things we may see is increased frustration, not only in ourselves, but also in our dogs. Dogs may begin pulling harder on the leash, vocalizing more, struggling to disengage from movement or sound, or having difficulty settling because they still feel the need to gather information about the environment. We may also see hypervigilance or overscanning of the environment. This can look like constantly monitoring windows or doors, orienting towards every sound, pacing back and forth, scanning the environment repeatedly, or struggling to relax because they are still trying to process. Some dogs may also have difficulty slowing down and decompressing overall. Their nervous system may remain more activated, causing reactions to movement or sound to become faster, more intense, and more difficult to interrupt over time. This can sometimes contribute to escalating frustration or reactivity because the dog does not feel they have had enough opportunity to safely observe, process, and understand. These frustrating behaviors do not mean that dogs should be allowed unlimited or unrestricted access to every form of environmental stimulation. The goal is not constant exposure, constant monitoring, or allowing dogs to remain highly fixated on the environment around them. The goal is helping dogs to have safe and thoughtful opportunities to observe, process, and engage with the environment in a way that supports regulation rather than overwhelm. By incorporating passive enrichment into your dog's daily life or targeted enrichment plan, you are helping support emotional processing and reducing uncertainty within the environment. When dogs are given opportunities to pause, observe, listen, and gather information, they are often better able to regulate, make decisions thoughtfully, and engage with the environment in a calmer and more functional way. This also connects heavily to choice and agency. Allowing dogs opportunities to observe and process can help support confidence and emotional recovery because they are being allowed time to understand what is happening around them rather than constantly being pushed through the environment. Recognizing and supporting natural observation behaviors can also help reduce pressure and frustration for some dogs, especially dogs who are more environmentally sensitive or highly aware of movement and sound. And as always, we want to stay mindful of the individual dog in front of us, their emotional state, and their level of sensitivity to the environment so that we are supporting thoughtful engagement rather than overwhelm. These frustrating behaviors do not mean that dogs. In order to best support your dog's needs, one of the most helpful things you can do is build an enrichment plan. When building an enrichment plan, we want to start with the behavior the dog is exhibiting. If your dog is repeatedly displaying behaviors that feel maladaptive, frustrating, or difficult within your environment or lifestyle, that may be your dog communicating that there is an unmet need somewhere within the overall balance of their life. Sometimes those unmet needs are obvious based on the behavior, and sometimes they are not. So the first step is simply observing the behavior itself. The next step is mapping out what you are already providing for your dog over the course of a normal week. As you take inventory of activities, routines, exercise, enrichment, training, rest, and social opportunities, it can be helpful to notate which enrichment categories those activities already support. That allows you to more clearly identify what may be missing. As you begin tracking these activities and looking at how they naturally layer together, you can often start seeing where there may be gaps in the overall balance of the enrichment plan. From there, you can decide which core categories may need more support and what additional layers may help create better balance. The goal is balancing enrichment across all 6 categories in ways that are functional and sustainable for the individual dog as well as the guardian. No single enrichment activity will meet every need, and no 2 dogs will have the exact same enrichment plan. Different activities are also going to affect dogs differently depending on age, environment, emotional state, time of day, who is present, and whether the dog is engaging independently or socially. In order to best support, passive enrichment works really well as a bridge between enrichment categories, enrichment activities, or simply as an opportunity for the dog to pause and decompress. Passive enrichment falls most heavily into the calming category because it is centered around stillness, observation, regulation, and giving the dog opportunities to process the environment around them. Watching and listening can help support nervous system recovery and thoughtful behavior throughout the day or during activities by allowing dogs moments to pause rather than constantly moving from one activity directly into another. This also connects heavily to the predation sequence because the passive enrichment focuses on the I lock portion of the predation sequence. That pause to watch, assess, track activity, and gather information is part of how dogs naturally process what is happening around them and make decisions about what to do next. They are looking at what has already happened, what information the environment is giving them, and what response may be most appropriate moving forward. Passive enrichment works best as a supportive layer within your enrichment plan rather than a complete enrichment activity on its own. There are some passive enrichment activities that can stand alone as their own, and we will talk about a few of those later in the presentation. But in most cases, passive enrichment is something that layers naturally into your other enrichment categories and daily routines. It gives dogs opportunities to pause, observe, process, and decompress while still engaging with the environment in thoughtful and functional ways. When we start looking at passive enrichment through the family dog mediation breed lens, we are able to better understand observation as a functional behavior rather than simply seeing it as a distraction or environmental fixation. Different dogs experience the world differently. Some dogs are naturally more visually oriented, while others are auditory oriented. Some dogs are highly aware of movement, and some dogs are constantly monitoring sound or environmental changes. A large part of that comes back to breed purpose and what dogs were originally bred to notice, monitor, respond to, or interact with within their environment. Observation is a functional behavior. Watching, listening, orienting, tracking movement, and gathering information is all part of how dogs make decisions about what they should do next. And understanding those breed tendencies can help support better enrichment planning because it gives us more information about what types of observation and environmental interaction may feel naturally meaningful to the dog in front of us. When we start looking at the family dog mediation breed categories are based around function, specifically looking at what the dog was originally bred to do and how genetics and the predation sequence were either heightened or suppressed in order to support that job. The 10 family dog mediation breed categories are bulldog, guardian dog, gun dog, herding dog, natural dog, scent hound, sight hound, terrier, toy dog, and world dog. Each category contains breeds that tend to share similar functional behavioral directives, meaning they were selectively bred to interact with the environment in similar ways. That does not mean every dog within a category will behave exactly the same, but it does give us important information about what types of behaviors, movement patterns, sensitivities, motivations, and environmental interactions may come more naturally to them. This can become especially important when we start looking at observation and passive enrichment because different breed groups are often going to gather information from the environment in very different ways. The dogs that tend towards visual observation are going to really enjoy opportunities for passive enrichment. For some dogs, visual observation can naturally lead further into the predation sequence, especially from orienting an eye lock into stalking or chasing movement. Herding dogs are a great example of this. They were bred to watch and monitor the movement patterns of other animals and then quickly respond based on the direction given by the handler. A lot of their job requires constantly observing movement, making quick decisions, springing into action, and then returning back to observe again. Sight hounds were bred to visually locate movement over long distances and then quickly chase it down. Because of that, they're often highly aware of fast movement or small movements in the distance and open environmental spaces where they can visually track motion. Their bodies were also built for speed and sprinting, so movement itself can become extremely meaningful to them. Terriers tend to be highly visually oriented, especially towards small and subtle movement. They were often bred to locate and hunt small animals, so they may be very aware of movement in grass, leaves, brush, or underneath objects. A lot of their orienting and eye lock behaviors are connecting to notice tiny environmental changes. Guardian dogs tend to observe the environment altogether differently. Rather than focusing heavily on fast movement, they're often monitoring the overall environment and scanning for changes or potential threats. Many guardian dogs prefer having a broad visual picture of what is happening around them and may naturally seek higher vantage points where they can observe multiple things at once. Across all of these breed groups, visual observation tends to include behaviors like watching movement closely, tracking movement patterns, monitoring environmental changes, scanning open spaces, and orienting towards movement within the environment. These behaviors are functional and deeply connected to how these dogs were originally bred to interact with the world around them. Dogs that tend towards Dogs that tend towards auditory observation are often highly aware of environmental sound and activity happening outside of their visual range. Guardian dogs are listening for signs of incoming threat, environmental changes, or activity happening at a distance. A large part of their role is environmental awareness and monitoring. Scent hounds, even while working with their nose to the ground, are listening for indications that prey, movement, or activity may be nearby. World dogs are often highly environmentally responsive and may use sound to help navigate obstacles, movement, or changes happening around them while moving through the environment. Across these breed groups, auditory observation behaviors may include pausing to listen, monitoring distant sounds, alerting to environmental changes, orienting towards subtle noises, and tracking activity outside of visual range. These behaviors are functional and connected to how these dogs naturally gather information and navigate the world around them. Observation behaviors are deeply connected to those early stages of the predation sequence where the dog is gathering information, processing the environment, and deciding what to do next. The orient is when the dog first notices something within the environment. The eye lock is the moment before movement, where the dog pauses, focuses, watches, and gathers information before deciding how to respond. That eye lock is an instinctual and functional behavior. It is part of how dogs naturally assess movement, environmental change, and whether something warrants further attention or investigation. What happens next depends heavily on breed tendencies and their genetics and the dog's instinctual response patterns. For herding breeds, that eye lock may naturally lead into a slow stalk or a controlled movement towards the target. For more predatory breeds like many sight hounds, that eye lock may move directly into chase behavior, often skipping the stalking portion altogether. As dogs move through everyday life, these observation moments can sometimes interrupt activities like walks or lead into reactive responses toward movement or sound within the home. And while these behaviors may not always be conducive to the environment we are trying to move through, they are not meaningless or random behaviors from an evolutionary or functional perspective. They are connected to the dog's instinctual way of gathering information and responding to the world around them. Observation behaviors are deeply. This is one of the reasons predation substitution training by Simone Mueller can become such a valuable outlet for dogs who are naturally drawn towards observation, orienting, eye lock, and tracking movement. Rather than expecting dogs to completely suppress those instinctual behaviors or constantly trying to redirect them away from the environment, predation substitution training focuses on safely fulfilling natural predatory behaviors within a structured and reinforcement based framework. A large part of Simone Mueller's approach focuses on the orienting, eye lock, tracking, and observation rather than trying to rush dogs through those moments or prevent them from happening altogether. This passive enrichment can provide dogs with safe and functional outlets for behaviors they may otherwise try to fulfill independently. At the same time, this approach also helps guardians better understand what their dog is actually doing, what parts of the predation sequence are being activated, and how to support those behaviors safely and thoughtfully within everyday life. One of the games Simone Mueller developed within the predation substitution training is called the stalking game. This is a structured environment activity that allows dogs to safely engage in passive enrichment and those early portions of the predation sequence, like orienting, eye lock, and observation. The goal is not to encourage dogs into the follow-up behaviors of stalking or chasing, but rather to place structure, reinforcement, and thoughtful engagement around the eye lock and observation portion of the sequence. Over time, the dog and guardian develop clear communication around when the game is beginning, when it is happening, and when it is finished. The dog is also given a large amount of agency within the game, including the ability to communicate when they need more time, more distance, or when they are finished. During the game, the dog is allowed to observe movement from a comfortable distance where they can remain under threshold and continue thinking clearly without tipping over into the impulsive reaction or becoming overwhelmed by instinctual responses. The reinforcement throughout this process helps support thoughtful observation, emotional regulation, disengagement, and controlled decision making skills around movement. This can become extremely helpful for both ends of the lead. The guardian learns how to recognize and support these instinctual behaviors in safe and structured ways, while the dog gains opportunity to safely meet those needs with guidance, predictability, and clear communication. As you begin learning the stalking game, it is important to recognize the skills that this activity is actually supporting. The stalking game supports observation and environmental processing, slower decision making, engagement and disengagement, emotional regulation around movement, fulfillment of the early portions of the predation sequence, and confidence and agency. One of the ways you know the game is working well is when the dog is able to remain fully under threshold and continue engaging thoughtfully with the environment without becoming overwhelmed, frantic, or overly impulsive. If the dog begins becoming over aroused, overly intense, or unable to disengage, then distance and intensity should be adjusted in order to help the dog remain successful and regulated. Observation is the priority. The goal is not allowing the full predation sequence to unfold into chase or reactive behavior, but rather supporting thoughtful engagement with movement and environmental processing. It is also important to recognize that not every dog will find visual observation calming. If the activity appears frustrating or overwhelming for the dog, it may mean the environment is too intense, the dog is too close to the movement, more practice is needed, or that another form of passive enrichment may be more appropriate. Keeping sessions short can also help prevent dogs from becoming overwhelmed or moving over threshold. And throughout the game, we want to remove as much pressure as possible and allow the dog to work within the structure of the activity while still having agency and communication within the process. As you begin learning this, when our dogs are expressing behaviors that may point towards unmet needs, enrichment becomes one of the ways that we can help support them. Passive enrichment allows safe rehearsal of observation and environmental scanning, listening and auditory processing, orienting towards movement, watching without reacting, slower and more thoughtful decision making. The goal is outlet before eruption. When implementing passive enrichment, one of the first considerations is allowing choice and agency with their observation, especially with visual enrichment. We want to create opportunities where dogs are allowed to pause and observe rather than constantly being rushed through the environment. Observation itself is a meaningful form of participation in the world around them. Dogs do not always need to act on what they are observing. Watching and listening allows dogs opportunities to make decisions about whether something is important, whether it needs attention, or whether they can safely dismiss it and move on. Giving dogs opportunities to practice observing and dismissing, that is the support of choice, agency, and thoughtful behavior, and also reduces frustration from both ends of the lead. When dogs are allowed enough time to gather information and process, they're often better able to disengage naturally rather than remaining fixated or escalating emotionally. This is also where slower rates of engagement can become really helpful. By reducing pressure and allowing dogs opportunities to observe movement from a comfortable distance, they are able to safely gather the information without feeling the need to immediately react or become involved. When implementing passive enrichment, sometimes we already have more passive enrichment in our dog's daily lives than we realize or give ourselves credit for. A lot of passive enrichment can be naturally layered into everyday activities while also supporting other enrichment categories like calming, social, predation, and foraging or scavenging opportunities. During decompression walks, this may look like allowing your dog to stop and observe and watch what is happening at a distance and then naturally return to the walk when they are ready. At home, this may look like allowing dogs opportunities to watch out windows or from the porch or patio, or simply listen to what is happening around the neighborhood through open windows. You can also create calming environmental sound by playing things like birds or rain or nature sounds through the television or speakers while your dog is resting or home alone. Car rides can also become passive enrichment opportunities when dogs are allowed to safely observe the environment from a comfortable distance without direct interaction. Wildlife observation from a safe distance, either outdoors or through the television, can provide another opportunity for dogs to engage in thoughtful observation and environmental processing. On long hikes, long walks, or extensive outings, passive enrichment may simply mean taking breaks and allowing dogs the opportunities to pause and rest. You can also naturally layer passive enrichment into social or foraging activities. For example, dogs resting with a chew at an outdoor cafe, watching activity from a park blanket, or observing people and movement from a comfortable distance while remaining relaxed and engaged with their chew. Even simple things like open windows, weather permitting, can give dogs opportunities to listen and gather information in calming and low pressure ways. Sometimes we already have more passive enrichment in. If you feel that your dog is lacking structured observation opportunities within their enrichment plan, you can begin implementing them more intentionally. This can include playing Simone Mueller's stalking game, encouraging observation and disengagement from movement at a distance, using toys like robotic toys or people playing with toys from far away, resting and watching wildlife, pattern games involving orienting and observational pauses, search activities with observation built in, and focus games that encourage thoughtful engagement with the environment and even with you. The goal of structured observation activities is thoughtful engagement. We want dogs staying emotionally regulated, remaining in observation rather than escalating into movement or reactivity, and practicing environmental processing in a safe and functional way. These activities can also help dogs safely fulfill portions of the predation sequence while remaining thoughtful, regulated, and under threshold. If you feel that your dog is lacking, so far we have spent a little more time focusing on visual observation than auditory observation, but that does not mean auditory processing is less important. Audio and visual processing often happen together, and dogs are constantly gathering information from both the movement and the sound within the environment. As you begin layering auditory enrichment into your dog's plan, this can include chewing or resting while listening to outdoor sounds, walks where environmental sounds are present but are out of sight, sounds that might be out of sight and then orienting towards them so that they can see if there's any movement to follow. You can pair sound and watching movement from a distance. Outdoor rest and observation activities are also going to include listening to the environment. They can do forage and scavenging activities while there are out of sight environmental sounds, and simply allowing dogs opportunities to listen and process during decompression times. A lot of passive enrichment is not about creating entirely separate activities, but rather recognizing opportunities that already exist within everyday life and allowing dogs to thoughtfully engage with them. As you continue building out your enrichment plan, it is important to make sure that all your dog's needs are being supported across all enrichment categories. Passive enrichment is most firmly rooted in the calming category, which is why it often works best as a secondary enrichment layer rather than the primary focus of the activity itself. Usually, another enrichment category or activity is going to be your primary focus, while passive enrichment becomes something layered into that experience. The goal is for the enrichment categories to support one another. When activities naturally layer together, enrichment plans often become more balanced, flexible, sustainable, and easier to incorporate into everyday life. You may have one primary activity or category that stays fairly consistent, while the things you layer into it can shift and change depending on the dog, the environment, or the day. That layering also helps create novelty and flexibility and more balance within the overall plan while still keeping activities meaningful and engaging. With passive enrichment specifically, small moments throughout the day are often more meaningful than expecting dogs to remain still and observant for long periods of time all at once. A lot of passive enrichment works best when it naturally becomes part of the dog's normal routines, movement, and daily life. As you continue building out your passive enrichment can layer naturally into the social enrichment category through shared observation experiences. This can include calmly sitting together and observing the environment without pressure or expectation to interact. Low pressure shared experiences like car rides, sitting on the porch, or calmly watching TV or activity during outings can also support both social and calming enrichment at the same time. Passive enrichment can additionally support co-regulation through presence by allowing dogs opportunities to pause and experience observation alongside familiar people in safe and predictable ways. Passive enrichment Passive enrichment can layer into physical enrichment by allowing breaks and observation pauses during movement-based activities. You can also focus on recovery after heavy physical activity, and this can become an important opportunity for dogs to rest, process, and return to regulation. You can additionally build in slower and more thoughtful movement between larger bursts of activity to help support that decompression and observation time. Passive enrichment can layering passive enrichment into forage and scavenging activities can be done so by pairing observation with food-based enrichment like chewing, licking, scavenging, or searching activities. You can also add environmental novelty by changing locations and allowing opportunities to process new sounds in the new surroundings and environmental activity while engaging in those behaviors. Keeping foraging activities slower and more thoughtful can help encourage observation and decompression and environmental processing while the dogs seek and search. Passive enrichment can layer into problem-solving activities through observation-based games that encourage thoughtful decisions. This can include simple activities like locating sounds, hide-and-seek games, searching for movement, or discovering where something is coming from within the environment. These activities encourage the dogs to slow down and process rather than reacting impulsively. Passive enrichment can layer into While we have talked about passive enrichment and the predation sequence throughout this presentation, as a reminder, passive enrichment layers especially well into those early portions of the sequence like orienting and eye lock. By supporting that observation, they are able to gather the information and track movement. This can include controlled observation, thoughtful disengagement, and structured observation games like Simone Mueller's stalking game. For all enrichment activities, it is important to adapt for the individual dog in front of you. Not all dogs are naturally going to find slowing down and observing calming or enjoyable, and that is okay. When building your enrichment plan, focus on the current skill level, their ability to regulate, and gradually building observation and emotional regulation skills over time. For some dogs, this may include additional guidance, structure, or training support as they learn how to engage thoughtfully with the environment. Using sounds, movement, and activities the dogs already naturally find interesting can help make passive enrichment more meaningful and successful. Keeping sessions short can also help maintain engagement and prevent dogs from becoming overwhelmed or moving over threshold. Observation should remain thoughtful rather than stressful or overstimulating. And as always, we want to match enrichment to the individual dog's ability, environment, and overall safety. The goal is to adapt the activity to support the dog rather than forcing participation in activities that are not functional or enjoyable for them. And while breed tendencies can help guide enrichment planning, they do not determine the exact needs or preferences of every individual dog. For all enrichment activities, now it's time for you to share. Feel free to put into the chat your dog's breed or breed mix, any challenges you may have encountered with passive audio or visual enrichment, activities your dog may naturally enjoy, ideas you've gotten from this presentation, or ways that you may be able to fit passive enrichment into your current enrichment plan. I'll also copy these prompts into the chat so you do not have to worry about remembering them as we finish up. Once the presentation is over, I will go through your responses individually, answer questions, and give feedback or ideas where needed. This is also a great time to include any questions you may have about the presentation or about your individual dog and this subject. Now it's time for you to share. As you continue adapting your enrichment plan for your individual dog, there are a few important things to remember. Try activities more than once before deciding whether or not they are a good fit. Some dogs need time, repetition, and lower pressure before fully engaging with something new. Allow full agency within the activity and give dogs the ability to opt in, disengage, or communicate that they are finished. Some dogs, especially as they age or if they are more sensitive, may become more hesitant about trying new activities, being in new environments, or reluctant for new experiences. Adjust the difficulty, environment, setup, and expectations to support the individual dog rather than expecting every dog to engage in the same way. And whenever possible, look for opportunities to layer enrichment categories together so activities can support multiple needs at the same time. As you continue adapting the primary reinforcer for passive enrichment is often real life itself. This can feel a little elusive because it is often not dependent on us providing a specific reward or reinforcement within the activity. The dog is naturally finding reinforcement through the process and the environment itself. This is part of why passive enrichment can become so meaningful for many dogs. Remember that passive enrichment is supporting emotional regulation, confidence and understanding, and rehearsal of intrinsic and instinctual behaviors. Our closing quote today comes from Simone Mueller. And Simone says, the goal is not to suppress instinctive behavior, but to provide safe and appropriate outlets for it. Thank you for joining us today. Our next virtual enrichment series will be Saturday, July 18th at 10 a.m. And our topic will be the predation sequence with a focus on seek and kill. If you need additional assistance with your enrichment planning, you can do enrichment planning sessions in person at the studio with Trainer Shay. These sessions are 50 minutes long and they allow you and Shay to sit down and come up with a 6-week plan of novel enrichment for you to try with your dog. As always, we appreciate your feedback, which helps us shape future sessions. You can let us know, how did today's session help you, and what topics would you like covered as we plan for the upcoming sessions. Thank you again for joining us, and now on to the chat.